this presentation is done by Inclusion Ireland. So my name is Guillaume. I am working as an advocacy officer at Inclusion Ireland. Most of you might know about us, but still to repeat once again, Inclusion Ireland, we are a national organization for people with intellectual disabilities and their family members. We've been created since 1961. We are going to talk today about the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, in short, CRPD. I will divide this presentation into two parts, and you can ask questions at the end of the first half and at the very end of the presentation. So I really want to make it practical and really so we have a conversation about the convention. So if you want, you can put your questions in the chat box, or if you know how to do, you can raise your hand when we have a moment for questions so we can start a discussion all together. So once again, for the people who just joined, so the UN CRPD, what it is. So first, it's one of the most widely ratified convention in the world. So as you can see on the screen, like many countries are in green, including Ireland, who ratified the convention in 2018. So countries ratified the convention. It means they committed to implement the convention, and beyond that, the rights of people with disabilities in their countries. And just some countries just signed it, meaning they recognize the existence of the CRPD, but they didn't commit to implement it. So what is the UN CRPD about? So the UN CRPD is a mix of rights and principles, with maybe the most important of them that led to the creation of this convention, the famous motto, "Nothing about us without us." So this convention was the end result of a 4 years process of collaboration between governments and disabled people organizations around the world from 2002 to 2006. And this convention is really about what most of you may know as the paradigm shift from the medical to the social model. So really from object of care to subject of rights, where the focus is put not on the person, but on the society and how the society need to remove barriers to ensure equal access, equal opportunities for all of its members. So the UN CRPD contains 50 articles. We won't go through all of them today, but through this presentation, I just want to give you a sense of what is inside this convention. The very beginning of this convention is really about cross-cutting issues, article groups, and then some other articles are more about more specific rights that you all familiar with, like independent living or legal capacity. We'll see it later. And some are more technical, so I won't go through them today. It is really about introducing the convention. But if you have any questions, once again, feel free to ask. So the purpose of the UN CRPD, the Article 1, so it is to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights by all persons with disabilities. So something that people will tell about the conventions very often is that this convention, the CRPD, does not create new rights. It just reaffirms rights that existed for everyone but that were not applied for people with disabilities. So it's very important. It's just the equal enjoyment of all human rights, and also promote respect for the inherent dignity. So there are a certain number of core values in this convention, and the convention says it itself that all the article should be read in light of all these guiding principles, such as non-discrimination, full and effective participation, respect for diversity, equal opportunities, accessibility, equality between men and women, and respect for evolving capacity of children with disabilities. So nothing new from all the advocacy we're leading here at national and local level. It's principles and notions we're all very familiar with. So it also shows that this convention is really the reflection of the fights we all lead at the ground. Another important article is, as we've said before, countries ratified the CRPD, meaning they committed to implement the convention, and beyond that, to respect the rights of people with disabilities in their countries. And the convention makes very clear that it entails this convention obligations for member states, including Ireland. So you don't have the full list here, but I just wanted to go through some of them with you and to give you some practical Irish examples here. So for instance, countries have to adopt all appropriate laws and other measures appropriate, meaning compliance to the convention and to the rights of people with disabilities. So for instance, here in Ireland in 2015, we adopted the Assisted Decision-Making Act to make sure that the system of supported decision-making was more compliant to the rights of people with disabilities and to the convention. The government wanted to do that before to ratify the convention, to make sure it was more in line with the CRPD values. Another good example is that a couple of months ago, we repealed the Lunatics Act, which was really against, not in line with the rights of people with disabilities, that was preventing people from getting married, for instance. So every country, including Ireland, has to make sure that the laws and measures are compliant to the convention and the rights of people with disabilities. Another obligation that is made to countries is to provide accessible information. A good example that comes to mind is the public sector duty. So public sector duties that obliges public services to not to discriminate against any groups, including people with disabilities, but it also includes making accessible information to make sure that everyone can easily access services and understand the processes, to have access to the same rights as everyone else. Another obligation is to promote the CRPD training for all professionals and staff working with people with disabilities, to make sure that the paradigm shift is really implemented on the ground in all practices, that we not have old practices, but really that it reflects the social human rights approach of disability, that people with disabilities are treated with respect. A last one is that countries, that Ireland has to involve people with disabilities in the decision-making processes. A good example that comes to mind is the Disability Participation and Consultation Network that was established last month by Minister Rabbit to involve people with disabilities in all policies and legislation process, making processes. So this network is working closely with all disabled people organizations, including Inclusion Ireland, as I am, Disabled Federation of Ireland. So really to ensure that they are involved in all new laws. So that is some practical examples to show you how Ireland has to implement the obligation on the ground. These were mainly positive examples, but I'm sure we'll be able to discuss about less positive examples. So I wanted to show you also a video about the more specific rights in the convention. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen to be able to show you the YouTube video here. So I can share the sound as well, otherwise you.
We are all equal before the law.
Women and girls with disabilities should have the full rights and freedoms enjoyed by everyone in the community.
As children with disabilities, we have the right to express our views on matters that affect us.
We are capable and contributing members of society.
We have the right to physical access and information access.
We have that right to life.
We have the right to be rescued in times of disaster.
We have the right to equal recognition before the law.
We have the right to justice.
We have the right to live freely in the community, to live independently and be included.
We must not be tortured, exploited or abused.
We have the same rights as others to choose where we live and where we travel.
We have the right to access information and to express opinion.
We have the right to privacy and to have intimate relationships.
Our children cannot be taken away just because of our disability.
We have the right to education, jobs, and healthcare.
We have the right to participate in cultural and public life.
Well, so this nice video that you've seen was made in Australia by the Disability Resource Advocacy Centre. So as you can see, in terms of specific rights, once again, nothing new. Like, it is things that we've been talking and fighting for the past decades in terms of education, employment, living in the community, accessibility, equality and non-discrimination. So these are the rights in the UN CRPD. So I guess that's it for this part on the content of the convention. I didn't want to make it too long. So do you have, so we've talked about the CRPD, what's in the convention itself. So now let's talk about who controls its implementation and how it is relevant for us as family members and also for self-advocates. So the UN CRPD is a committee composed with 18 independent experts who are following the implementation of the UN CRPD in the countries. So this CRPD evaluates, the CRPD committee evaluates countries, including Ireland, makes general comments, and processes, takes individual complaints. So I'll just go through each of these aspects. So this is the process. So let's see it in an Irish perspective. So if you look at the top, the step number 1, that's where we are at the moment. Maybe some of you have seen that the Irish government released its state report in December. So basically this report is the Irish government telling us, I think I am good at implementing the CRPD on this article. I'm very good on independent living with this or this aspect, or employment, we have been doing this strategy or this law. So this is where we are at the moment. And I will talk about it more at the end, but one of the action plan is that everyone, all of you, all of us can submit comments to this report. There are links in the PowerPoints. So if you want, you can go through it. It's also available in easy to read version, and you can send comments to the government about this report. So until the 9th of April. So after that, the Irish government will send it to the CRPD committee. And then we go to step number 2, look at on the right. So the CRPD committee received the Irish state reports from the Irish government, but also received other reports from, for instance, the Irish Human Rights Equality Committee, IREC, which is going to do the alternative reports, but also what is called shadow reports from the disabled people organizations like ourselves, Inclusion Ireland, as I am, Disability Federation of Ireland, just to present different versions of how are the rights of people with disabilities in Ireland, to make sure that there is not just the version of the government. So there's a good dialogue about it. So once the CRPD in step number 2 received all these reports, they are going to issue what they call a list of issues and questions based on concerns they've seen in the reports. So here, once again, as parents, families, people with disabilities, we can provide inputs. So for instance, Sam, you were talking about legal capacity and like how people can be vulnerable in some situations and how you concerns that Ireland maybe is not doing enough on this. Here you can have an input to send reports to the CRPD committee to say, there is this report about abuse in residential care services, just to shed light and to make sure that this is addressed during the review process of Ireland. And then step number 3, Ireland is going to submit written replies with to this list of issues and questions. And then once all these documents have been sent, this exchange of documents between Ireland and the UN CRPD committee, there will be, in step 4, a constructive dialogue between the UN CRPD committee and the Irish government delegation. But not only, it is a constructive dialogue where organizations of people with disabilities are invited to join, just to make sure once again that it is not only the version of the government, but it's also what civil society, what people with disabilities have been impacted in their lives, just to give a good state of play of their rights. Once this dialogue took place in Geneva, where the CRPD committee is, we go to step 5. So the UN CRPD committee, after this dialogue, is going to release what they call concluding observations. It's basically recommendations about Ireland, saying, okay, we are happy that you've been doing this or that we are happy that you have a public sector duty, or that you have a good strategy on deinstitutionalization. But we are concerned that, for instance, still many people are living in congregated settings. This is something they're going to say, they say to all the countries. And so they're going to address recommendations on what is good, what is concerning, and what should be improved. And then last step, step number 6, it's basically continuous proceeding to make sure that these recommendations are being taken into account by the Irish government and that they are implemented. So all of this process from step 1 to step 6, this process should take place every 4 years. Another important aspect of the CRPD committee work is the general comments. So as I told you before in the questions, the convention says sometimes very little about the articles. So what they do is that they are doing one document, big piece of document, where they're really interpreting what does it mean, these rights. So for instance, the first one they did in 2014 was about the equal recognition before the law, like all about the supported decision-making. So it was the first thing they wanted to underline, which really proves how important is this issue, not only in Ireland, but everywhere, and including for the CRPD committee. And in this document, for instance, they talked about what are the challenges, what are the good practices in some countries. And also they give some sort of tools to countries, to Ireland, on how to implementing these rights, implementing good supported decision-making processes. So as you can see, there are a number of general comments that have been made by the CRPD committee on different aspects: accessibility, women and girls with disabilities, inclusive education, independent living, equality and non-discrimination, participation. And there is at the moment a general comment that is being prepared by the CRPD committee on employment. There will be a day of general discussion online organized by the CRPD committee on the 22nd and 24th of March next month. And everyone can take part, make a statement, just need to register. So there's a hyperlink, I've put it on the ongoing. So we can talk about it after the presentation, and I'm happy to send you all the information about it if you want to take part in it. So how about families? So the convention itself says very little about family, but thanks to the general comments, there are more interpretation of what these rights, what the articles mean in reality. And how today we're here to talk about how it is important for family members. It's important to say that the CRPD committee said quite a lot about it. For instance, the rights for children to grow up in a family, the obligation for state parties, for countries, for Ireland to provide adequate support services to family carers so they can support their child to live in the community. There is also financial support that should be provided for family carers. Countries should provide social support to families, including counseling services, circles of support, and other adequate support options. And it continues making strong statements such as, if the country doesn't ensure an adequate standard of living for people with disabilities and their family, the country is violating the convention. And another statement that was made was to recognize the important contribution of organizations, including family members and relatives of people with disabilities, in promoting, advocating for people with disability rights. So, as you can see, the CRPD committee is well aware of the important contribution we are making in advocating for the rights for people with disabilities in these general comments. So you've mentioned during the questions, so yes, there is complaint mechanisms. Individual can address complaints to the CRPD committees. There's actually a good example. Last September 2020, Spain was condemned by the CRPD committee because they violated the right to inclusive education. The child with Down syndrome who was sent to a special education center, even though his parents had objections about it. So this is an example of what individual complaints can achieve. The only problem is that to address individual complaints, you need to ratify what is called the optional protocol. And Ireland did not ratify the optional protocol, meaning that at the moment, we cannot send individual complaints to the CRPD committee. The Irish government said that they would ratify the optional protocol after the review by the CRPD committee, so probably in 2022-23. So as you can see, compared to the first map, where all the countries were in green, all the people who ratified the convention, here there's way less people, way less countries who ratified the optional protocol. So, you know, that's still a challenge, because we want to make sure that everywhere in all the countries, including Ireland, we can address individual complaints if we feel that our rights have been violated. So this is definitely something we should push forward as advocates. In parallel of the CRPD committee, there is a special reporter who is looking at how the rights of people with disabilities are being respected and the CRPD is implemented in the countries. So maybe you're familiar with this man, J.R. Quinn, who was the lead of the Center for Disability Law and Policy in Galway, in the University of Galway. So the Special Reporter Office can investigate about the situation of people with disabilities in countries. Also, just like kind of the CRPD committee with general comments, the Special Reporter writes specific reports every year on different topics. For instance, legal capacity. There's also videos available on the website to explain what is legal capacity and supported decision-making. There was also inclusive education. So a number of topics. All the links are in the PowerPoint presentation, so you will be able to go through it if you want to learn more about it. So that's it for the presentation about the other monitoring mechanisms to make sure that this convention is implemented. So as you said in the question, what are the next steps for us? So as I said at the beginning, there is a draft Irish state report that has been released in December. There is an easy to read version of it, so people can go through it and send and make comments until the 9th of April. You have the link here in the presentation. And then organizations, including ourselves, are going to make an analysis of the state's reports to criticize it and then to prepare like what I talked about, the shadow report, to make sure that the CRPD committee can listen to a different version than only the governmental version. And then the government announced that it will organize consultations where, as family members, you can participate and to ensure that your testimonies, that's what you experience, can be taken into account in the report to the CRPD committee. And maybe another one that is not here, but I would add is, as I've showed you, in the process, in the monitoring process, in all the steps, there are different time where as a civil society, we can participate and make our voices heard.